on this computer.
Oh,
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here with Al Dukes, the executive producer of Boomer and Geo. He's been a New York radio executive producer for 20 years now? It's got to be.
in New York, 20 years. That's right.
So 20 years in New York. He's got a beer named after him, and he hates podcasts. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't hate podcasts, right?
I don't. I want to love podcasts even more. I hate the organization of podcasts on the platforms like Apple Podcasts, things like that. It makes it impossible to find a good podcast.
I think that's interesting because I guess I'm in a lot of sports media classes. Everybody's very, do it yourself and whatnot with getting it going and like starting your career. And you're the first person I've heard that like is kind of honest. Nobody's going to listen. Nobody decides.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's like the way the platforms are set up. It's like it's the top of the line guys who are already famous from doing other things in sports, right? Like Bill Simmons, Colin Cowherd, the Pardon My Take guys. And then the next level down, or anybody after that, it's just a mishmash of everybody, and everybody looks equal. Everyone has a cool looking graphic. Everyone's got a cool name. There's no way to tell what's good and what's terrible without testing everything out.
Yeah, and the fact that you could just do Zoom now, I mean, everybody could just crank out whatever in a podcast, and it's interesting. But I guess to get into it, Al, I just want to hear like about where you're from. Where did you grow up and that type of stuff?
I grew up in Colonia, New Jersey, outside of like Woodbridge, Edison, that area. I went to high school there. Then I went to college at what is now Kean University. I loved Howard Stern growing up. I wanted to work on a show like that. I never thought I could be like Howard Stern, like be the main guy, but I thought I could be a guy who works on a show like that. So that's what I went to school for at Kean. Then I went to graduate school at Indiana State for no real reason other than to kill 2 more years. Then from there, I got a radio job in Tampa, Florida, which is how I started.
So you mentioned Howard Stern as a big influence. I guess growing up, I hear a lot of my dad, I just hear stories about how popular he was and just how like revolutionary he was. Just what was it like being a Stern fan in, I guess, the 80s and 90s?
Late 80s through the 90s. To me, his peak really was the 90s. It was a different time. Right now, everyone's trying to, right now jokes are taken seriously. If you say anything that's racial or could be seen as insensitive in any way, it's not taken as a joke. It's taken as you must be canceled, all that stuff. And it was not like that, it very much was a guy that you felt like you could connect to, when he would have a 3-day weekend. He would come back on Monday complaining that his wife's family came over for dinner. They were touching all of his stuff. He was hiding in the basement. It was a very relatable guy. And then on issues like the LA riots that happened in 92, I think, the OJ Simpson trial, I mean, he went all in on what a lot of people were thinking. And back then, he wasn't afraid to say it, so it always felt like a very honest show to me. It was a guy who would tell you that he had a small penis when everybody would hide that sort of thing. It seemed like any shortcomings you had, you were okay to share with people because there'd be some ball busting and things, but everyone was accepted.
Yeah, and they also showcase, Wendy and Beetle and all those great, wonderful characters and whatnot. Do you still listen to it? Because I talked to my dad a lot about this. I mean, during COVID, I'll say it's been terrible. I mean, it's really taken a downturn.
I when you first went to satellite in 2006, it was my very first time stopped listening. I was like, you know what? I don't know. Now he's going to try to be overly shocking. And I never thought that was I always thought the essence of his show was really talking about the news of the day. I was never into the strippers and porn stars and any type of shock jock type stuff, which I always thought was a very small part of his show. But that's what people always identified with him. So when he first went there, when he had no rules, I didn't like it. I felt like him having some rules and constraints made him funny, made him angry, all that stuff. So I stopped listening for a little while, got back into it, but I actually just this week canceled the Howard Stern portion because it's guests that I have no interest in. He's sort of become, the Hollywood elite. He's the guy that all the people he made fun of, he now apologizes to. I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it's just true. I mean, it's sad. I don't know how serious is given that they gave him the big contract or whatnot. But
Yeah.
even on YouTube, like me and Jason talk about it. Like we try to watch like old Artie clips and whatnot, and like they pretty much scrubbed everything. Howard 101's like extremely sanitized, and it's like,
Yeah.
It's like it's just this PC crusade, which I kind of want to get into next. I feel like on Twitter, social media, just like what we're seeing now, everything's so amplified and kind of out of touch with how the normal person is. I think your show does a great job at just continuing to like know what your base is and know who you're catering to, and kind of fighting against like the PC or the expectations that I hear other shows like succumb to. Like, how do you feel? Like, what's your overall feelings on like being executive producer in this time?
Well, it's hard because everybody has, especially like Gio just moved into a new house. Boomer has his foundation and a lifetime of charity work. I moved into a new place recently. It's not worth risking your livelihood, but it's also frustrating as someone growing up listening to Howard Stern and wanting to do that kind of radio where you have an opinion, a really strong opinion, and fight tooth and nail for your side. You can't do that anymore. Not worth it, because you could be canceled for things that you didn't even think were, other than, your own opinion on something that is not racist or sexist. It's still, if it's seen that way by one person and they make a loud enough complaint, it could get traction. So it stinks because I feel like it's watered down the talk radio format. A format like Howard Stern, Opie and Anthony, that doesn't exist anymore. There's no radio stations like that anymore, because eventually they'd blow themselves up. So it's tough. It's frustrating. And then you got to be careful not to take those thoughts that you want to say on the radio to Twitter, because it's easy to do that too. And you'd be in the same boat. So I'm not happy about it. It's not what I signed up for in the 90s to be able to do. I wanted to, no matter how crazy your opinion was, you were allowed to have one. So.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, do you have any opinion on like, before Craig came back, I listened to the Michael Kay show for a little bit, and that's very like in line with like, I feel like, I don't want to throw down like PC and cancel culture, but they're definitely like very politically aligned, and I feel like how they run their program. Do you see like an out? Like, do you think there's a bubble that's going to burst and people are going to go back to this like way it used to be, or it's just like we're going to have to learn how to grow with it?
Yeah, I don't see it going back. I really don't, because it was slowly moving this way, and then it sped up. I think it feels like it sped up during the Trump administration. That's when we, between the Trump administration and social media's rise, it like split the country in two. Like everything was either one side or the other. So if you believed this, you must be a Trump supporter. If you're a Trump supporter, you must believe this, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And it just like everything gets divided. Like things that don't sound political at all become politicized.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to me and Jason, like I wouldn't consider I'm a very moderate person, but going to a liberal school in Boston is like being a moderate is like being a right wing. And Nazi, but
right. I think it goes to the extremes. Like there is a middle ground somewhere in there,
Definitely. So to get to kind of take it back a little bit, let's talk about like your radio beginnings. So you said you started out in Tampa. What kind of radio were you involved with? Like, what kind of roles did you have when you first got into the industry?
When I first got to a radio station in Tampa, it was all like nationally syndicated programming. So there were no live hosts in the studio. I was just, as they would say, running the board, taking feeds in from other parts of the country and taking just national shows. And in fact, I feel like it was like political shows, but I don't think I was bright enough to even figure that out back then, that it was political shows. And then I was only there for a short time when they sold the radio station to a company that flipped it to a sports talk station. So in order to keep my job, I stayed on with the talk station. So that's how I got into talk radio, sports talk radio. And I did that for my 7 years down there. And I came back up to WNEW in 2001 to do regular talk, like Howard Stern type talk. And then once that got blown up because of Opie and Anthony going crazy, then it like became a thing. If you're into talk radio, you either go the sports route or the political route. Those are your options. There's nothing else. So I went the sports route because I was able to go with Craig and Boomer, and I knew Craig wasn't going to do a hardcore sports show. So this was going to be the closest that I could get to doing regular fun guy talk radio.
So with like, all right, with working with, all right, no, I have sorry. I'm losing myself in my question here. So with sports, were you a big sports fan growing up? I know you mentioned this was just an opportunity that popped up, but how big of an influence was it regardless?
Yeah, growing up, this would have been, like what I wanted to do. Growing up, I loved baseball, football, basketball. Loved all that stuff. Then I kind of lost touch with it, except for probably football, all through college. And then once I got the job at the Tampa radio station, back then the Tampa area only had the Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Lightning didn't exist yet, and the Tampa Bay Rays didn't exist yet. So it was like all football, which I was all in for, So, and then the Yankees spring training was down there. So then there were a lot of people that moved from this area down to Florida. So there were a lot of Yankee fans there. So then even when I came back to work at WNEW, I lost touch with sports again for a couple of years. And then starting at FAN in 2007, I picked it back up. So I was a huge sports fan as a kid. Then I feel like I maybe know too much now about the sports industry and all that stuff. And it, once you know too much, it's not as enjoyable as it was when you were a kid.
Yeah, I guess it's a business. So getting started at the Fan, I mean, it happened in kind of a unique way. I mean, to talk about, I don't know about canceling or whatnot, but wasn't it? It was Imus with the infamous Rutgers basketball, I guess, racist remarks.
Correct.
So like, Imus is one of, probably him and Howard Stern, right? At the time were the two biggest radio guys in the country. If I'm not mistaken on Imus.
This always gets the second place to Howard. He wasn't even close to Howard Stern. His listenership was minuscule compared to Howard Stern.
I mean, my thing is like, I remember growing up and like my friend's mom driving us to school was listening to Imus and whatnot. Yeah. So I mean, it was not like as colorful as being with my dad and listening to Stern, but right. I remember it as I guess it is. But still, I mean, he's a pretty big radio guy. Like, what was it like to come in? He's a big name, big name for 30 years. What was it like coming in, and like, what were the pressures of having to, step into that role after Imus?
Well, it's funny because I clearly was aware of WFAN, but I had never listened to it. I had heard who Mike and the Mad Dog were, but prior to working there, I never put that station on. I wasn't into sports enough at the time to think to listen to people talking about sports all day long. So to me, it wasn't as huge of a deal because I wasn't that intimidated coming in, because I wasn't like, if I was to be going to 92.3 K-Rock after Howard Stern, that would be an intimidating role to me. So the Imus thing wasn't all going in and replacing Imus wasn't all that big of a deal to me. Uh-huh. But because of the way he lost his job, he had a lot of support at WFAN. People didn't like the way that ended. So when we came in, even though we had nothing to do with that, I think people weren't thrilled with the show when it first came on, just because we were replacing a guy who'd been there, like you said, for like 30 years or whatever it was. And, got kicked out for reasons that some people didn't think he should have been kicked, lost his job for. So it was a little weird when we first got there, but I think, once we were there a couple of months, everything was cool.
Yeah. Well, also, when you first got there, how were Mike and Dog were also big, probably definitely the biggest names in sports media at the time in New York. How were they to you when you first arrived there?
Mike, I never really saw Mike. But Dog would walk around the office, and he was very friendly. He was very similar to the guy you would hear on the radio. That's how he was in the hallway. I mainly tried to just stay out of their way because, I knew that they were the big guys at the radio station. So I wouldn't even go kind of near the studio when they were there because I didn't want to be interfering with their show. I didn't know what their dynamics were like in the hallway and when they talked to the producers. And so I always try to stay out of the way of other shows because I wouldn't want people, coming into the control room when I'm producing a show. So I always stayed out of the way. But Mike wasn't unfriendly to me. I just never really saw him. And Dog was friendly to everybody in the hallway. So
when you got into FAN, was there a lot of internal pressure for you guys to succeed? Like, did you feel like you only had a couple months to get it right, or you could,
No, I feel like that would be the case now, but back then I feel like you did get more time to figure it out. Like I even remember back then I was going to buy a condo. I was going to move and buy a condo. And I remember thinking in my head, even if this doesn't work out, I'll be here for 3 years. So that'll be, I'll already start making some payments on the place. And I definitely remember thinking in my head, they'll give us at least 3 years to figure this out. Mm-hmm. Now I think you would get 3 to 6 months to figure it out.
So like with that, did you have a point on the show where you realized like, hey, this could be like a really, we could be the next Mike and the Mad Dog on this station, where it was like, it clicks for everybody. And, this is definitely a program that's going to be popular.
Yeah. I always say about Boomer in the beginning, a couple things to Boomer's credit. One, he let Craig be the radio guy and drive the show and steer the show. And most people that come to radio from somewhere else where they're very successful, very type A personalities, and Boomer was a quarterback in the NFL, most of those guys will not let the radio guy do the radio stuff. They just don't. It's a control issue, And to Boomer's credit, he let Craig do that. And the other thing that I think it was successful right off the bat is we had a couple callers early on that were busting Boomer's balls, and he laughed and went along with it. Again, not something that a lot of these type A personality guys that have a big name from something else coming into radio. I've seen it many times in my career, So those two things, I remember thinking, this could be good. That part, it was the most important thing to me, the chemistry of those two guys together. And those two things that Boomer let Craig do the radio stuff and was able to be the butt of jokes as well. Those were the things I think that made it successful.
I mean, do you feel like, that type of radio broadcasting, this, sports and kind of Howard Stern-y, like, don't take yourself too seriously, not just around sports. Like, I feel like now it's had a resurgence with Barstool. Do you feel like that maybe what you were doing was like the forefront to like this whole kind of Barstool explosion, or separate?
I always felt like with sports, people that are really hardcore into sports, there's only a certain amount of those people. Right? In order to get a big audience, you've got to get people that know about sports, but they're not locked into every pitch of every Yankee game or Met game, So the show has to be interesting. If we're going to talk about the Yankee game last night, it's got to be interesting for somebody who didn't see the Yankee game last night. So instead of breaking down pitches and breaking down moves, we break down, he, beamed this guy in the shoulder. He's got to get paid back the next time we see him. You didn't have to see the game to have an opinion on that. That if your guy gets hit, you hit another guy. Or I remember when we first started there, A-Rod was a big thing. So A-Rod was cheating on his wife. A-Rod had strippers there. So again, we're using sports as a jumping off point, but the show wasn't about A-Rod, the baseball player. It was about A-Rod cheating on his wife and hanging out with strippers. We wanted to do more of that stuff. I looked at it like what Deadspin was back then. It was sports, but it was sort of the scandalous side of sports. But you still had to, WFAN does have a hardcore sports audience. So you have to serve them and serve the people that are just looking for talk. That's not politics. Because like I said, if you were looking for talk back then, when we started, you were either going to get politics or sports. Those are your only two options. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to be that option that was the sports option, but also had other fun things involved as well.
Yeah, and I think the show obviously does a great job of that. It's just, weird having that juxtaposition next to Mike, who, takes himself more serious than like probably the president or, the Pope, and the Funhouse clips. Just, me and Jay send them to each other and we pee our pants watching all the old Mike stuff.
But Mike was also there for so long that people watched him for that loved sports and loved what he had to say, and people watched to goof on him, right? Yeah. So he had both of those audiences, and he had a big audience for that. Even people that said they hated Mike listened to Mike. So while it wasn't what I was interested in because it was really hardcore sports, he had an audience there. I don't know, if he would have been a new broadcaster starting out there without the history, it probably would not have. I don't think it would have succeeded because of what we were getting used to for sports radio, which was kind of half sports and half pop culture stuff. I don't think he would have been successful, but because he'd been there for so long, he had an audience built in, and he had people peeking in that wanted to see if he screwed something up or repeated something, so he did have a big audience.
Yeah, his audience almost turned into, he got like a bunch of our generation who really didn't care about what he had to say, but just wanted to call in and mess with him.
And then people that wanted to hear those people call in and mess with him.
Right. To kind of talk about the goofballs and the ball busters, working in and doing radio in the New York tri-state area, you've got a lot of those kind of know-it-all. If I didn't blow my knee in high school, I would have been guys. Is that something you've come to appreciate? Do you laugh when you get some of these callers who are just like, listen here, Boomer, I got to tell you, if I was on the Mets, they would have won 4 World Series in the 80s. Have you come to appreciate those types of guys?
No, I think I like them less and less as the years go on. There's a couple of guys. I was an athlete. I had, plantar fasciitis. Let me tell you what David writes in for. I've been a Yankee fan since 1961. Don't care. It doesn't give you any more credibility for your take as anybody else. And I met Boomer in East Islip in 1979 in a bagel shop. Those are like so many times I think the callers call just to hear themselves talk. And it's not, I'll often find myself saying to them like, okay, that's a good story for you, but why does the guy sitting in traffic on the LIE care? Why does he care? I don't know. I thought it would be interesting. No, it's interesting for you. It's a cool story for you, but it's not interesting to the guy stuck in traffic.
The funniest one was I listened to the show last week, and there was the guy who was talking about Zach Wilson having ADHD.
Yes.
He went on like the 10-minute thing about how he knows exactly how it's going to make Zach Wilson a better quarterback.
Yeah, no, so that guy was so absurd I put him on. Because it's one thing to say, I have the same injury. To pull out ADHD and say that's going to make him a good quarterback, and I know what he means like that, I'm like, perfect, this is good. Like I'll put guys on that have a good point, or guys on that Gio can make fun of. And I did that when Craig was there. Is this somebody that can be mocked? Or is this somebody who's got a good point that we haven't thought of? Like, those are the two things that'll get you on.
And Boomer said that to you. He was like, Eddie would not have let this guy on.
Right. Eddie would have put him on.
Yeah.
That's another thing. Like me and Jay, we're up in Boston now, but we just laugh at like these New York guys that like you see around the golf course or whatever. It's something I miss about this region because it's just ridiculous. But talking about like regional or whatnot, like was it like I don't know where I'm gonna go with this, but I'll just take stats.
Really?
Regionally, no, regionally, I was gonna say like it's obviously a very New York show, but like it feels more New York than like other radio shows I listen to. Like how embedded are you guys in this community now? Like, are you rolling into bagel shops and people are like, "Al, like what's up?" Like, do you feel like you have this like extended New York family that like is just peeking in and
Yeah, in the suburbs for sure. Yeah, I meet a lot of people down the Jersey Shore where I live now. The station's very popular down here compared to like when I was up in like Basking Ridge, New Jersey, up in that area. I did not get it as much, but down the Jersey Shore, man, there's a ton of people that listen here. I know on Long Island, we get very big numbers in Long Island. So, yeah, you do. It's always nice meeting people in person because you really, when you're in that room and you're in a box and you don't see your audience, you do forget that people have it on in cars. I'll think about it sometimes if I'm stuck in traffic and I'm like, wow, look at like all these cars back when people were going to work. All these cars are stuck here. I hope we're making the ride a little more tolerable for them. But regionally, one interesting thing, you brought that up and it reminded me, like New York is so unique compared to like where you are now in Boston. So if you're a host on the Boston station, you could say that almost 90 something % of your audience is a Red Sox fan, a Patriots fan, a Bruins fan, and a Celtics fan. We don't have that here in New York. Everybody's split, right? So there's Mets fans, there's Yankee fans, there's Jets fans, there's Giants fans. So I always wonder, like up in Boston, when you're doing a show about where the Patriots are the main topic, of course people are interested. I often wonder sometimes if the big story of the day is a Mets story, do the Yankee fans care? And do they get split up like that? That's where New York is in such a unique position, more so than any other major city or any city with the sports topics. So if you do a whole show on, we would find this like when the Yankees were really good, the Giants were really good. The Jets and Mets are always doing screwball-y things. So they tend to be the story. When you're doing well, you're generally not the story. So I often wonder, like, do Yankee fans care about this Mets disaster? Or do Giants fans care about this Jets disaster? So I've never come up with an answer for that.
I mean, rooting for like the Yankees and the Giants, it's always fun hearing about like the dysfunction going on with the Jets. Unfortunately, not as much with the Mets anymore because he's just like, I'll call Jay up and I'll give him shit about, whatever's going on and whatnot. That's why I would listen at least to get more insight on that to make it seem like my life's better.
Right.
Up in Boston, I'm just getting shit from everybody because we're in a little bit of a slump right now, but
Early, always early.
Yeah, but like, kind of with that, the Nets, like, the Nets, like, kind of weird. My dad was a Knicks fan, but I transferred I was a Nets fan growing up, but once they did the whole Brooklyn move, for some reason, I was just like, I didn't really like it, and it's kind of lame, but I switched to being a Knicks fan. But like the Nets are this team that like, have, 3 of the top 10, best basketball players in the league. And it still feels like they're struggling for headlines against the Knicks every single night. Like, how interesting is like having to feel through that or build a show around that?
Yeah, well, they've told me here at FAN when the New Jersey Nets were winning a championship with Jason Kidd, no one cared. So I think the Brooklyn Nets still suffer from that. Knicks are still always going to be the story. Even now, like when we talk Nets, we generally are not talking about what's going on in the court. It's like, why is Kyrie missing another game? Why does Kevin Durant why is he injured and we're paying him all this money? James Harden, even when he was coming over, the story was this guy sucks. He's fat. He's not going to do anything. And now he comes over. He's doing great. Not interested, So this is going to be an interesting year for that to see if, as the Nets go further into the playoffs, if they do, how, or is that a topic that can be sustained on the radio and keep people's interest.
Mm-hmm. With that, when like you're criticizing a team or a player, how often does it ever happen where a team will reach out to you, or you'll get like wind from a player and like, they'll come on the show and be an asshole about it? Or
No, we don't get a lot of blowback, which is nice because we have affiliations with teams. We carry the Mets, we carry the Yankees, we carry the Giants, and I guess they know that that's what sports radio is. It's really a complaint department for the most part. So we don't get pushback from the teams, which is great. And I don't know if the players don't listen or they pretend they don't listen, but generally, if we're bad mouthing a player and we request them to come on, they're not going to come on. So there'll be no confrontation because they just won't come on. So now players have Twitter and things that they can occasionally criticize the media on their Twitter feeds and things. And that does happen, but it really hasn't happened over the years. I can't even think of one that, Geno Smith a couple times, like when Craig was going to prison. I remember Geno Smith tweeted out, "Is this the guy who used to bust my balls every day?" And now he's going to jail, So occasionally a guy will take a shot, but it's very rare.
Kevin Durant went after Rappaport pretty hard.
Yeah, but I feel like they're actual friends and they were just busting each other's chops.
You think that was just all bullshit for publicity?
No, I think they probably really got into it, but then realized that they're friends and they're just goofing around. If it was for publicity, it was bad publicity because, listen, like as we were talking earlier, the language they were using in their fourth was not good.
Yeah, I was shocked when KD got the pass on that. Kind of.
Yeah.
But
I think in that aspect he should have got the pass because I think they are friends and they were just busting each other's balls.
There's a difference between, and I heard actually like Craig, I think Craig was talking about this. There's a difference between the conversation that you have with a friend that you get leaked versus like what you publicly put out there. Obviously we don't say things to our friends that we don't necessarily, back to the Howard Stern, just like unfiltered. Like it's just a weird time that, any little thing can just get out there and you're done. Right.
Anything you text to your friends, if they want to be a dick, they can screen grab it and put it out there, or fake it. You can create a text exchange that never happened and the person can put your name on the top. Anything is possible.
Yeah.
And you're guilty before proven innocent now.
So you have I would say an elevated status in, the New York market. Is there any famous person that you got to meet through the show that you were just like completely starstruck for? I know you're a big like music guy. I don't know if you got like the chance to meet any, music people that you freaked out about.
No, to me, the exciting part is meeting guys that I was a fan of when I was younger, like in high school or something. So anybody on the 86 Mets that I got to meet over the years, that was always exciting for me. Or any of like the NFL players from the 80s, like Joe Montana. Mike Tyson was cool just because he was so normal. And one day when he came in, he showed up on his own. He had no entourage. He had no one with him. And he showed up like an hour early, Mike Tyson. And he just sat in that room with me and Eddie. And he was so pleasant. And I remember he walked in, he had earphones, the earbuds in. And I said, I just trying to make conversation because we had so much time to kill. I go, what are you listening to? He goes, Shania Twain. Oh, it was so odd. He's got a face tattoo. He could kill me and Eddie in one punch, knock both of us out. And he was like listening to Shania Twain. That and like pro wrestlers from the 80s also, like Hulk Hogan, Sergeant Slaughter. Like those are the guys that I am interested in. The current athletes, they're much younger than me. I don't know. They don't. That doesn't do anything for me.
Gotcha. That's Sergeant Slaughter is a throwback to you. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Al, not to harp on Mike too much, but
yeah,
As like an occasional listener, for years, and then a frequent listener lately, I have picked up on in the past that Mike and not sure if it was exactly Mike and Craig first or Mike and Boomer sort of like developed this contention where Boomer didn't really have anything against him, but Mike really had it out for Boomer. And then you guys kind of just tried to stay neutral, and then Mike would go after you guys. How did that start and why? What was the whole deal?
Boomer, I don't think ever had a problem with Mike. He didn't care, but radio guys like to fight, right? So Mike is a radio guy and Craig is a radio guy, and those guys just always butt heads. I guess Craig's whole take on it is that when they first were getting to WFAN, Mark Chernoff had them go to lunch with Mike. It was Chernoff, Mike, Boomer, and Craig, and that Mike showed up indoors at a diner with his sunglasses on the whole time, telling Craig that the show wouldn't work because Boomer and pro athletes don't work as hosts. And I guess Craig also felt like we didn't get any support there from the current shows that were there. But like I said, they were friends with Imus, and they all felt he got unceremoniously shown the door. So they weren't thrilled for us to be coming in. So I understand that part too. But I think it was just a matter of, two radio guys butting heads, and it's fun to get into a battle. And Craig was probably looking for a reason, and Mike showing up in sunglasses telling him the show's not going to work was a great reason to start going at him.
And I sort of picked up when Craig came back, he kind of tried to make this like slight feud between you guys and him. But it seemed like it settled down, right? Because he hosted on Tuesday.
Because it wasn't real. That's why. Because there's no real dislike. We like Craig. Craig likes us. There was no. You can. It's only fun if somebody gets really pissed. So if Craig buzz our balls and we buzz his balls and no one really gets pissed, it doesn't really go anywhere.
Right.
It's when somebody gets really legitimately angry at something.
Right.
So I will say Craig did appreciate that Mike did take the high road when Craig had his troubles, because Mike could have gone in hard on Craig from all the ball busting Craig did for him, and Mike did not do that. So right. he did take the high road there.
So as it went with Craig, did you ever have a sour part of your relationship with him? I know I watched the documentary with Boomer, and he said that it was tough for him just because of that relationship.
Yeah, no, I had a great and still have a great relationship with Craig. He was like a nut job on the air. Off the air, he was the sweetest person. Like, always looked out for me and for the behind the scenes guy, as Boomer does as well, as Gio does. But Craig was so nuts on the air that people thought he was nuts off the air. And he was in the hallway, quiet guy. He'd walk to and from his office. He wouldn't be a nut. And on the air, he'd be nuts. And, he would say stuff that he didn't even remember saying. There have been occasions over the years where, like, my girlfriend would be upset at something he said. And I was like, what? And I was like, she's like, and he said, if we all went out to dinner or something and he made a joke about her or about me that she thought was about her. And she'd be like, she'd be upset early on when we first started dating. I go, if I tell Craig you're upset, he's not even going to know what you're talking about. He's not going to remember having said anything like that. Like, that's what he does on the radio isn't the guy in real life, and he's not even going to remember what he said. So he likes you, he likes me, he busts balls on the air, and that's it. So I always had a great time with Craig. You never paid a bill when you went out with Craig. Craig always paid for dinner, always paid for drinks, always paid for everything. If I happened to be walking by his office when he was ordering sneakers online before the show, he did, what size are you? 10 and a half. I get you. You're going to love these. And then sneakers would show up at your house. Like, that was just the kind of guy he was and still is. So I never had any issues with Craig over those years.
Right. And he really is like a great, like, class A to radio personality.
Yes.
He owns the room. He's
correct.
Roll perfectly. And he immediately comes in like nothing's changed and just starts busting Jerry's balls. When Jerry, I forget exactly what he was talking about, but Craig was like, "Don't forget that I'm the only reason you're here.
Right.
That I made you." And Jerry's like, "Yeah."
Okay. No, you went right back, right? Like, not like he wasn't even gone for 3 years. Just right back to where he was.
Right.
So like, as COVID hit, sorry to curse, but sorry about the weird transition there. Like, what was it like? Just I want to know, what was it like having to put on a show when there was like nothing to talk about except for like, the bullshit that was going on in the news for, months on end.
That is, I could never do it. That is a special skill. I do that hour with Jerry now, 5 to 6 a.m. And there are days where I'm like, I think I could get through an hour. Never 4 hours. Like, you got to be kidding me. But when there's two people on, like, I don't know, I legitimately don't know how Mike by himself did 5.5 hours. I don't know how you do that. Like, I don't. And then people are like, Mike always repeats himself. He's sitting there for 5.5 hours on days when nothing's. You want to do that on a Monday during football season? All right. Like, on a Wednesday in the middle of baseball season where the games are essentially meaningless. I don't know how people do that. It's just, and I always think, like, with the morning show, we have each hour, there's like a longer first segment, then the Jerry segment, then a shorter third segment. So to me, I always think for the host, that longer first segment is your work for the hour. The Jerry segment, Jerry's coming and you're reacting off Jerry's clips. And the third segment is short, pick up a call or two, finish up your topic, then you start over. So I think with a 2, 3, 4-man show, it's easier to do. But everyone has to fill content, right? So the newspapers have to fill their sports news, Barstool's got to fill their sports news, all the ESPN, all these sites do. So there will always be things that you can look at. It's where you do with those things that don't seem like a big deal. And I think Craig is great at that, taking something that is not a big deal and blowing it way out of proportion to do a show. It's not easy to do, and it takes a special skill, but that's what I think radio talk show hosts have over everybody else. TV guys are doing a half hour, with multiple writers and researchers. Radio guys are sitting there by themselves. It's me, Eddie, Jerry, Boomer, and Gio. That's it. So I don't. There were some days where I go in and like, I don't know what. I prepare a show sheet of like topics that just so we don't miss anything, and I'm looking at it some days going, or like I go to bed and I'm like, hope something crazy happens in the Yankee. So
now with prep for the show, then how does it, like, I want to hear, like, how is it going? Is it just you every day, like, making a list of, like, right before you go to sleep, like, what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, like so yeah, I use like an RSS news feed for a bunch of websites like ESPN and Pro Football Talk and Awful Announcing, New York Post, New York Daily News, TMZ Sports. There's a bunch of them. So I'll just go through those throughout the day, and then at night, normally around 6 o'clock, I'll put a sheet together as to what does it look like so far going into the games, and I'll sometimes send that to TV at night so that they can get a heads up for building graphics around discussions and things. And then I get up at 2 o'clock in the morning now, and from like 2 to 3, I do the same thing. I go through everything. I watch the Yankees and Mets condensed games. I write down notes. I put together a show sheet. I send it out to TV. I send it to Boomer, Gio, Jerry, anybody who wants it, and go from there. And then in the morning when I get there, I'll like sort of just group some things, like which of these stories go together. So it's like, okay, the Yankees and Mets stories go together. Is there a couple of interesting baseball stories that might go together? What's the Jets angle today? Is there anything going on with the Giants? If there's not, what else is going on that's interesting? That even if it's not New York, it's interesting, or I can make it interesting, or get to another topic that's not a sports topic based off of this.
Yeah. Yeah, a hidden gem that makes me laugh hysterically because it's basically every time is when you guys have some sound bites from John Sterling,
Yeah.
and it seems like it's every single time that either Gio throws in an impersonation or you'll play some sound bite, and it just makes me hysterically laugh. Does Sterling know that you guys kind of make fun of him every other day?
He doesn't listen to the radio station. I think he's been made aware. He doesn't seem to care.
Because and do you have kind of particular sound bites queued up that you're like, all right, I'm gonna play this one, or it's just like you
Eddie
have
does all the sound, like Jerry prepares the sound clips for his updates, and then Eddie is just the master at all of his sound drops. He's got thousands of them, like legitimately probably 5,000 or more, and he's got them categorized in only a way that Eddie would be able to find them. So when Eddie's out, it's impossible for anybody to step in there. But Eddie will do a similar thing. So Eddie will look at my show sheet, show topics, and be like, "Oh, I'm trying to think like what he did today. He had one. There was this TMZ caught up with Gronk, asked him what the chances of Julian Edelman going to the Bucks, and he said 69%, right? So Eddie saw that on the show sheet, grabbed all of his 69 clips. Everyone's saying it, Boomer's saying it. So then when it comes up, he's firing them all. So he'll do that too. He'll look at the show sheet and get ready, put into another category, things that he thinks is going to come up, things that are currently hot that he's playing a lot of. And then things just sort of pop up during the show that he'll get quickly. He's a master at it.
Right. And he'll pull like the same ridiculous Sterling clip from like 2 years ago. Whenever
he saves I'll give you a perfect example. He did it today. So he saves things he saved Boomer recording a Sports Minute from 2 years ago when the pitcher that's on the Blue Jays now, his last name is Ryun.
Oh, Hyunji Ryu.
Yeah. So back when he was on the Tampa Rays, Boomer did a Sports Minute about him, and Boomer was having a very hard time pronouncing his name. So Eddie saved that for 2 years, and it came up today. So because he pitched last night and shut down the Yankees. So it was legitimately a 45-second clip of Boomer stringing together Boomer not being able to pronounce the guy's name. I'm like, wow, like how does Eddie sit on these things for years to wait for the perfect moment? So yeah, that's how sometimes I'll think of something that he hasn't played in years. Sometimes he'll think of it, and or like when I'm doing the hour with Jerry, I'll try to give him a heads up. I'll tell him, I'll say, hey, I'm going to bring up so and so. Get all of your marijuana clips ready, because they just got like a ton of clips about people talking about smoking weed. They'll just fire off all those.
And it's comedic timing, and it's kind of what you said, making the show not just about sports, making it accessible for people who are fringe sports fans,
right?
That didn't catch the whole Mets game or the whole Yankees game, but they want to laugh on their ride to work.
Yeah, I always looked at it like if not to bring up like fake water cooler talk, which doesn't really exist anymore, but I always like to think like if you were, getting beers with your friends and they're really big sports fans and you're not, you would still be able to be in on the conversation if you listen to the show. Like even my girlfriend sometimes she'd be like, why do you guys care so much? And who is Kyrie? She doesn't know who he is, but she knows the name enough that it comes up constantly. So she hears the name Kyrie. She knows for some reason we're always talking about Kyrie. So I feel like if she heard somebody say Kyrie, she would be like, oh, that's like I always talking about on the show.
Right.
No, go.
That's a great comparison. But go ahead, Dale.
No, I was just gonna say, like, who's like the one guest that you pull on that is like, no matter what's going on in the news, like this guy's gonna produce, like that's always gonna be electric and a team player for the show.
Phil Simms, because he and Boomer have that relationship where they just say mean things about each other. So he'll come on, he'll be, ornery, fake angry, but he's good. He's funny. And he and Boomer go at each other. So it's, I always think those are the best kind of guests. There's not a lot of them like that, but Yeah, definitely Phil Simms.
Cool. Jay, you have any questions?
No, yeah, just just on Phil Simms. I think it was after he lost the Sunday night job, or what was it? Not Sunday night.
The Jim Nance teaming.
Yeah, right. And Boomer gave him crap about it, saying like he farted or something, and he got fired for farting. In the booth.
Right.
That was so funny. And Phil shot it right back at Boomer.
Yeah, the other group of guests that are normally good on the air are retired NBA guys. Like, again, from the 80s and 90s that don't work currently on a network because they have nothing to lose or protect. And those guys in the NBA, that was a different time in the NBA, man, where they would trash talk each other and they'll tell you about it. You know, they're the least guarded guys as a whole. NBA guys from the 80s and 90s. They're always a great, like if they were willing to come in studio, I would have put almost anyone on because they're just that good live and in person.
Yeah. And kind of like on the topic of guests or callers, what's the craziest or like just most ridiculous, whether it's funny, like annoying or anything in between, call or guest that somehow slipped past you and then went completely off the rails with Boomer and Craig or Gio?
Well, guest-wise, the worst guest we ever had was David Wells, who, you know, every guest for the most part comes with a plug, right? They're plugging something. And David Gout was plugging the disease gout. Like he wanted you to go to the gout website to get information, which is fine. We've had other gout guests on. Emmett Smith was a gout guest. You know, and we do the interview, and then in between we go, and David Wells is here on behalf of go to gout.com. Well, so what is your situation with gout? Be like, oh yeah, I get gout sometimes. You got to be careful with what you eat, and then back on to baseball. He would not answer any questions. He answered every question with www.gout.com. It was unbelievable. We're getting to it. It was crazy. It was, I know there was like a video clip that went viral on the Dan Patrick show with Matt Harvey, did the same thing with something that he was on from Nextel or some Fugazi phone thing he was doing. It was the same thing. He wouldn't answer any questions. He just kept going, oh, I'm really here to talk about Nextel or whatever the hell he was pushing. Those are terrible.
Why even go on the show at that point?
Exactly. I don't know. And then another time, Darryl Strawberry was on. He's always great. Darryl Strawberry is always great. And he was the opposite of like David Wells. He was on there to plug something and didn't know what it was. And he goes, just go to www.com. So great. All right, we'll check that out, www.com. And we'll get all the information we need. The callers, most of them are terrible. So I don't even know where to throw the terrible callers in unless they're so bad. Like I used to like when Craig would know which callers he could jerk around and just keep pretending to transfer all around the office, and they would stay on and keep repeating their same story over and over again. It's unbelievable.
Right.
He always knew which guys to pull it with.
Right.
And people either, you know, the reaction on Twitter, people either wanted to hear that all day long or thought it was dumb and repetitive. I would be dying laughing. I used to love that stuff.
Right. Because you guys, and that's kind of harkening back to the Howard Stern aspect of radio, but
yeah,
you guys wouldn't get as much of like the prank stuff as like Mike would get, where like the one guy, the famous one, I think was the guy that called about the horse, the racehorse.
Yeah.
And he was like, how can Miguel Cabrera win the Triple Crown? He's not a horse, Mike. I'll hang up and listen. And Mike just was, and it set Mike off for like 10 minutes. He was like cursing about the guy.
Well, that was the thing. And that's why people, like, it would be no fun to prank the morning show. We wouldn't care. Or you roll with it and have fun with it. Mike didn't. So then that became the guy to go after.
Did you ever meet Howard or Baba Booey or anyone from there?
I met almost everyone except Howard.
Mm-hmm.
I passed him in the hallway twice, and much like Mike Francesa in the hallway, quiet, head down, shy, weird. Yeah.
Yeah, he seems like the outside videos. He just seems like really strange, and him just and like you just hear horror stories of him like not interacting with like people, and just like I've seen the video of him doing like the PowerPoint for like
Oh my God, it's brutal.
yeah, it's brutal. But like, is there any guest that like will refuse to like? Has anyone been like such an asshole coming in the studio where they're like, "Don't address me, talk to my people"? Like,
No, and I think the reason for that is because Boomer is is one of the hosts, right? And they respect what Boomer did as an athlete. So the guys are, unless you're from New York, you're not going to know who Craig is. You're not going to know who Gio is. But the athletes know who Boomer is. So I think they always look at like he will be, and he always would. Like if one of the hosts was really going in on somebody as a guest, Boomer would always kind of help out from the athlete perspective, So I think people knew they had some sort of protection, a little bit at least, from the crazy radio guy that they don't know, that Boomer would not let things get too out of hand if it was confrontational ever. But no, we never ran into anything like that.
it's like, I guess personality wise in sports media, is there anybody that you kind of like look to now and you're like, they're also doing something like, obviously respectable. I don't want to say respectable because it sounds too like corny, but like that you look, but you're like, they're doing something really cool, really unique that like you take note of.
No, and that's the part that sucks.
Yeah.
I don't see anyone doing that. And I think that we should have people doing that, but no, unfortunately, I don't see a lot of that. And part of that now might be because people are afraid of pushing the envelope too much. So yeah, I hope it comes back at some point. I hope listen, I'm desperate to find a podcast or whether in or out of sports, of somebody going out on a limb and really defending their points. It's hard to find.
Right, and you can even look at TV like Keith, or I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bob Uecker, but apparently that guy is like the funniest. He has like a cough button, and I'm not sure. I'm sure you know who Norm Macdonald is, but Norman already talked about this on the Howard Stern show.
Yes, I've heard this.
And Bob Uecker would press the cough button and like commentate on like girls he's in the crowd, and then one time, the singer from Creedence Clearwater Revival was at the game, and he was like, I'll have him come up and sing for you. Like, this guy's just out of his mind. And then Keith Hernandez, who's like in a different way, also out of his mind.
Right.
These guys, they're gems in TV. And then you look at someone like Wayne Randazzo, like nothing against him, but he's like, Gio makes fun of him all the time because he's the most, he's the most just straightforward, sounds like he's out of the 1940s radio guy.
I without naming names, because I wouldn't want to get them in trouble. I do know guys that are in the mainstream media who, when the mic is not on, will just slaughter athletes. And then when the mic goes on, super nice about them. So it's funny to be like, why don't you do that when the microphone comes on? Because that would be awesome.
And that's what I was going to say. Do you wish there was more of that in?
Yes.
Again, it's just a catch-22. It's tough to be like that these days, but
it is. You've got to be in a situation like Keith Hernandez, who probably doesn't care, right? He seems the type that doesn't care, and that's what you need. That's why, like, I like that Keith complains about having, like, he wants the game to end so he could get home without traffic. Like, that's funny to me. Because that's legitimately what he's thinking. Like, oh my God, I would love to get out of here now and not hit the traffic.
And he had to leave. He left the game in like the 6th inning last week because the lady who watches his cat couldn't get into the house.
He in the door lock.
So yeah, he's 1 in a billion for sure.
Yeah, I like him.
It's like that like crazy uncle that like you just know what they're saying is like absolutely not right, but just it makes you happy to just like talk to them and whatnot. And that local guy,
right? Like if you heard like you wake up in the morning, and you heard like Keith Hernandez is in trouble. He said something crazy last night. You'd be like, yeah, I could see that. You would be like, I can't believe.
But It's just like it's weird for me now, like just going through YouTube or whatever. Like I'll just watch Jimmy Kimmel and like their whole show is just like still shitting on Donald Trump, and it's like the guy's been out of office. Like why? It's just like
Jimmy
everybody.
is the biggest phony out there.
Yeah,
The guy made his career from the Man Show, which was all about girls jumping on trampolines, what's in my pants, all this crap, and now he's the morality leader. Get lost.
but it's like I feel like people want it. Like people want not that, but like people want like this. I don't want to like old style, this Howard Stern like shot. Like we still make jokes. Like I still make jokes to my friends that are not. I wouldn't say like this. What I'm trying to say is it's still around. People are still attracted to this like poopy humor or whatever. But I just want to know why like these blue check marks on Twitter, not to totally turn it into that, have just totally like dictated how we consume media and why we consume all this bullshit now. Because it's our music sanitized, our media sanitized. It's just terrible.
Yes, I agree. It's a mess. I don't like it one bit. There are days where I stay off Twitter now because I'm so annoyed, and I don't want to tweet something stupid because it's very annoying.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think our music is sanitized. I think our music's a disaster. All the lyrics are the worst now. They're worse than they've ever been, ever.
I mean, it's just like you're not going to hear like a Nevermind the Bollocks or like the Nirvana Nevermind, like this album that's just totally going to like change or like challenge what you're thinking. Everybody's just kind of falling in line.
Well, no, I think the problem is that the audience is so divided up now. Like it used to be everybody would watch Letterman. Everyone would listen to Howard Stern.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was aware of the Nirvana album, right, when it came out. Now there's so many things out there that there's not a lot of mass shared experiences, right? So not everybody, if Nirvana, like when Nirvana was on Saturday Night Live, everybody saw it, everybody commented on it.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't get that now. Like even if somebody did something wild on Saturday Night Live, it'd take a couple days before it started filtering down through to everybody. Like it just, I don't like that either. Like everything is just like even something stupid like American Idol. We used to get 40 million people to watch on a Tuesday night, and we all knew what was going on. We don't have that anymore with any shows. There's nothing like that because there's a million podcasts, a million apps, streaming services, everything that you just don't get it anymore.
So we're going to wrap it up soon, but with that, do you feel like it's, a struggle for the future? You're obviously still very popular and rated well, that you have this traditional radio platform within all this extra media of podcasts. Like what's the outlook on the future, you think, for that?
Well, I think for sports radio, we're still in really good position because it's so local that these other platforms really focus on national things. So a lot of the podcasts are focusing on national sports. And if you want local Mets, Yankees, everything New York, you go to the sports station in town, no matter what town that is, Chicago, Boston, Dallas, so while I think it's difficult for music stations, because I think that you could replicate music everywhere. You can't replicate, Carton and Roberts, Boomer and Geo. They're unique personalities on only one platform. So I think for sports radio, I think we're still good. And I think future-wise as well, it's just a matter of keeping younger people to going to the radio, and I think that happens generationally from fathers passing it down to their sons and daughters. So many women that are fans of the radio station. I always like them, like, how did you get into WFAN? I say, either, my father always had it in the car, and then it reminds them of their father they get some connection from it, listening to it, or their brother, and then like they would explain even sons of fathers who listen, like, I used to hate when I'd get in the car, I wanted to listen to music, my dad would always play FAN. And then as they get older, they find comfort and they also put on FAN. And this thing that they were annoyed with, now when they get in the car, they play it. That happened to me with country music. When I was working down in Tampa, I worked at this country, that the sports station was also had a country music station in the building that would pump this country music. I'd be like, this is so terrible. This country music is so terrible. I'd hear it in the hallways. Then occasionally something would catch me, like, that's a pretty good hook. Then the one day I was in my car, so sick of my rock music, I was like, let me see what the country station doing. Then I started listening to it. So it was, again, a thing that I had no interest in being exposed to. But once I was exposed to it, I started searching it out or seeking it out.
So we talked about like this familiarity that, these people have with the fam. Like they feel like it's almost a member of their family, especially on like a morning commute is such a personal thing. And to share that, moment with you, like, how does that make you? How does it make you, like, are you cognizant of that on the show, and how does it make you feel?
Yeah, because I felt that way about Howard Stern when I was growing up. Like, so if somebody tells me that this is what they listen to make the time pass by traffic in the morning, or makes it a little easier to get up because they want to check out the show, I love that, because that's all I did with that's how I use the Howard Stern show and listen to the Howard Stern show. So I always like that. I always appreciate that, because that's what you want to do. That's what you get in this to do, to be for the people that are stuck in traffic. I think of mostly like that's a miserable experience every day, so to have something that's interesting and fun to listen to every day consistently, which is why I don't like to do a lot of guests. Like I want you to know what you're getting every morning. And if you're used to getting Boomer Gio busting Jerry's balls during a Jerry segment, I don't want you to get in the car and hear a guest that you might not care about, because that's not what you were looking for.
Right. So, especially one who's the world's biggest expert on ADHD for 20 minutes.
Right. He was terrific.
And then I think this would be, one of my last questions, but do you have like a singular moment on the show that you just look back on and you're just like, I can't believe that happened? Like, this is freaking crazy.
I can't believe that happened was the morning Craig got arrested. That was a big guy.
Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
I remember having a moment very early on with when we first got to FAN, and FAN generally was a really hardcore sports station, and we didn't want to do that. And the A-Rod stuff early on, I think Deadspin had the stuff about A-Rod cheating on his wife and things. And back then, at that point, at FAN, Deadspin was not a credible source. Like, that was, I think the people at the station back then looked down on blogs, and if you weren't like a real sports thing, it was like garbage. And I remember Craig really went with the story that Deadspin had about A-Rod cheating on his wife. And I remember management at the time being like, what is your source? I was like, Deadspin's not a source. And we had it on, like, let's say it was a Monday. On Tuesday, it was everywhere. Like, no one else talked about it on the Fan the rest of the day, but the next morning it was everywhere. And I remember Craig taking all the newspapers, it was front page of every newspaper, and shoving it under the door of the guy who told us Deadspin's not a source. I was like, from there on out, they didn't really question where we were getting things to talk about. It happened with like the Brett Favre penis photos. Again, that's not a thing that would be talked about on FAN back in the day. So the Jen Sturger stuff with that, Rex Ryan foot fetish. Oh, I remember how excited Craig was that morning. And Boomer tells the story, like how excited Craig was the morning we came in, and there were video of Rex Ryan adoring the feet of, at that point, we didn't know it was his wife, of a woman in the park. We had audio. Ooh, you have very lovely feet. May I smell them? It was just... And Craig was like, he wouldn't tell Boomer. He's like, oh, this is going to be so awesome. And he was so excited to have this, and Boomer was like, oh my God. So those were turning points, I think, for us, because they were popular segments. People did talk about them, and you no longer had to treat it like we were this breaking news organization that had to get all your facts right before you go on the air. I don't like that. Like, I feel like on talk radio, you don't have to get all the facts, right? Like, you can't lie, but if you don't know all the facts, I think you could still go with it. And then that's the time I think when it's good for callers to call in and they'll start filling in the gaps, right? I learned that from Ron and Fez many years ago when I worked at WNEW. He's like, they didn't want the whole story. They wanted to figure out the story on the show with the audience. You know, so I like that as well. Like, we don't always have to dig all the way deep into the story. We can get there during the show through the callers throwing in their information and Googling as we go along.
Exactly. That was like the Mike call when Gio was just making fun of Mike, and Mike calls in, you know, running
Right.
200 miles an hour.
Which was so great. The fact that we got Mike to call in, hilarious.
So as we, all right, the morning of, you know, Craig's arrest, could you just take us through like what it was like? I mean, hearing that, you know.
Yeah, well, I got a text from his wife at 4:15 in the morning. I was Jerry and I were in a bodega. Jerry was buying like a granola bar before we went into work, and she just said, Craig's not coming in today. I said, oh, okay. I said, is everything okay? She said, no, but I can't tell you what's going on. I was like, okay. And then around 7:15, 1010 Wins had the story that he was arrested. So that was a complete shock. Complete shock. It was unbelievable. You know, I had been around him when he gambled, for sure. He talked about it all the time on the show. I saw all the winnings, you know, I never saw losses. And like I said in that documentary, like, I started to think, like, why can't I figure this out? He's got this figured out. Why can't I get this figured out? You know, going on vacation and winning thousands and thousands of dollars. It looked easy. I sat there when he played. He was good. He was always winning. I was like, he's got this figured out. I got to figure this out. This can't be that hard. But they always say you don't see the losses, right? So I didn't see the losses. So that whole thing was a surprise to all of us. As much as people want to say, you were right there, you had to know what was going on. How would I know? Like I said, Craig was so nice and friendly on the air and off the air. His attitude never changed, which is something I could never understand. Like, the pressure he must have been under when he was going through all those losses. And the fact that it didn't change his attitude at work ever. Like, he was never pissy with anybody. Like, never. That was a complete shock because of that. You would think, like, I mean, my whole personality would have changed. I'd have been freaking out on the outside. I would not have been able to do a show. Like, he compartmentalized it. And that's how he was able to keep a secret just to himself, you know?
Did you think at the time that, like, you know, or after like that happened, did you think that like your career with the fan could be in jeopardy? Were you worried about the future of the show, or was it just so fresh and raw?
Yeah, I did worry about it for sure. But I think one of the interesting things with radio, and the reason why radio people last a long time, Mike doing a show forever, Howard doing a show forever, is you're there every day. You're not taking a break for any period of time where tastes change or people find new things. So the fact that Craig got arrested and then left WFAN, we still did a show every day. We had to do a show that day. We did a show the next day, the day after that. You know, and that's the thing. I think when tastes change in music or TV shows, you know, somebody puts out an album, they go on tour, and then that time when they're on tour, they're not writing new music. Then they get off tour, they write new music, they put out an album. 3 years has gone by. You're no longer top of mind to people. Radio, you're there every day. Like, every day. You don't take a break. You maybe get a week here, a week there, but you're not gone for any extended period of time for people to change their habits. You know, so I think that was a credit to, and that everybody, you know, we lost a member of the show. The whole show didn't blow up. We lost a main guy, you know, but I thought it was important also at that time not to immediately add a guy, but to just keep going with the one guy removed, until we found Gio to go in permanently. I think there was talk early on of putting different people in. And again, that goes to the consistency, like I was saying. I wanted the guy, man or woman who gets up in the morning and puts the show on to know what they were getting every day. You had a different person in there with Boomer every day, that would have been a mess. So Jerry slid over, and that's just the way we did it. We didn't add a new person until we knew what we were doing and where that was going. So that's the great thing about radio. I think the consistency, it's there every day. It slowly changes with the times as they slowly change. There's not these big shifts.
Yeah, like the tides have changed, and it seems like since Craig has been back, the fan, especially in the later afternoons, is back at the top of the New York sports radio. Were you shocked that that he was received as well as he was, or?
No, I was not. I knew he would come back and do this. I was surprised when he first mentioned Evan to me he said, "What do you think of Evan?" I was like, "Evan? And you and Evan?" Evan's hardcore sports guy. I did not see that working at first. And then after having further discussions with them, and I talked to Evan, and I was like, then the first day they were on, I knew they were good. I did. I think it's a perfect fit. You are not going to get anything by that show as far as facts with sports. And that's all Evan, and having Evan as that guy reacting to Craig's crazy things, I think is a perfect fit. It really is. Like, the sports people are going to get their sports stuff. And then if you're not that hardcore into sports, you're going to get all the crazy Craig stuff. And there's the energy on that show is Evan talks a mile a minute. Craig talks a mile a minute. Even when Tommy, the producer, gets on, he's it's like there's not a lot of dead air to get your thoughts in there. So when you get a shot, you got to talk fast. But I think it's incredibly energetic afternoon show. And for the longest time, people said, "Oh, you can't afternoons. You have to do sports, hardcore sports." Why? You don't have to. You have to do an entertaining show that people want to listen to. And that's what they have now. That's it.
Jay, do you have any last questions for Al?
No, I mean, thanks, Al. This was great. There's so
You got it.
There's so many moments that I remember from because I really grew up listening to your guys' show, and just to have like kind of the inside scoop on some of those things that made me laugh hysterically when I was 14, 15 years old. It's awesome. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, same thing.
It's weird now, like when guys are, how old are you? You're 20, what? 20? Wow. Right. So when I think back, like we started with Boomer and Carton 14 years ago, like seems insane to me that there are guys in college now that were kids when that started. The time really does go by very fast when you don't change jobs. Like it flies by. So yeah, that was always cool to hear.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thanks, Al, for
You got it.
So cool. I mean, it's just awesome to hear about everything New York sports, and you being that at the front lines of everything. Yeah, it's been awesome to hear, and I appreciate your time.
All right, see you guys.
All right, thanks, Al.
Cool.
Take care.
Thanks so much, Al.